Gentlemen, now I have the pleasure in introducing the final session. I think it's been a great conference so far, and I'm really, truly delighted that Lionel Barber, editor of the Financial Times, is here to finish off the conference with a keynote speech. Lionel, you have been editor of the Financial Times since 2005 and is one of the longest serving editors on Fleet Street, if we still can call it that. As well as being editor, you were previously news editor, Brussels bureau chief, Washington bureau chief, US editor, and Lionel has also written several books about Reuters and about Westland. And most recently, and I'm going to check my notes so I get the quote exactly right, in 2016 you were made a chevalier in the French Ordre National de la Légion d'Honneur, and again I checked the quote, for your contribution to high-quality journalism and the Financial Times' positive role in the European debate. We've just been hearing about quality journalism and the importance of it, and I think the FT is a fantastic brand which obviously embodies quality journalism. So please welcome Lionel Barber.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction, Ian. I'm truly honoured to speak before my peers here today in Cambridge. Honoured and somewhat surprised, because I am, after all, the editor of the Daily Ramona. So, Ian, I do hope and assume that you've cleared this invitation with the people who matter. Jacob Rees-Mogg, or my fellow journalist, Michael Portillo. Well, maybe not. Okay, I'm here to talk about quality journalism today, and it's been my passion from the day that I joined the Scotsman as a cub reporter in Edinburgh in January 1979. Like my father, Frank Barber, who left school at 14 and fought his way to Fleet Street, I've always viewed journalism not just as a profession, but as a vocation. Because to be employed as a journalist confers a special obligation to attend to the facts and to pursue the truth. That's why I will always fight for real news and quality journalism against fake news, state propaganda, and disinformation. Now, we here tonight can argue over different definitions over what's real, what's fake, and most importantly, what passes for quality journalism. For the moment, let's try to agree on this. We live in a world where there are no more accepted facts. A world where facts are secondary to opinion. A world where the media landscape has fragmented. And a world which has become intensely polarized. Colleagues, fellow journalists, we stand together on the front line. This year, a Guardian correspondent was body slammed by a Republican Senate candidate in Montana. This year, the BBC felt obliged to hire a bodyguard for Laura Kuenssberg while she was covering the annual conference of one of the country's main political parties. Now, of course, nothing, and I mean nothing, compares with the ultimate sacrifice made by Daphne Caruana Galizia, the investigative journalist murdered in Malta. But it does speak to the general climate here in this country, this climate of intolerance in public life. So what's going on? And more importantly, what can we as journalists do about it? how should we respond? Now, some people lament the end of deference. But anyone who lived through the 60s, and ladies and gentlemen, just for the record, I rarely smoked, but I always inhaled. Anyone who lived through that period knows that deference died some time ago. From Magna Carta, through the Levellers, and all the way to punk rock, we British have never been overly deferential, either towards people or institutions. But we British have always cherished traditional values like a sense of fair play, as well as religious and political tolerance. These values are under assault today. They're victims of the decline in civic discourse. They're victims of the decay in our political institutions. The Westminster expenses scandal, and hat tip to the Daily Telegraph for its reporting, its intrepid reporting, its meticulous reporting. That scandal, the expenses scandal, exposed some of our elected MPs as little more than chiselers. And today, the sexual harassment scandal may actually turn out to be bigger. It represents an abuse of power, which totally undermines confidence in our political system and our values, those traditional values that I talked about earlier. Finally, let's not kid ourselves. We British have taken actions in the name of popular democracy which have done grave damage to the standing of representative government. 3 referenda in 6 years on Brexit, the alternative voting system, and Scottish independence. Okay, this is not a Brexit moan. It is not. What it is, and I think it is particularly important to state this at Cambridge University, this is a blast against Oxford PPE graduates who gamble with the nation's future but have no idea about basic odds, like a binary yes-no vote on a matter of constitutional importance. Now, before I'm branded an enemy of the people, or even monstered in a certain other newspaper, which I, by the way, respect for its journalism and its reporting, let me be clear. I'm going to turn to the world of alternative facts, which I alluded to earlier. Now, President Donald Trump is the propagator-in-chief of alternative facts. Though he was right about one thing when I interviewed him with FT colleagues in the Oval Office earlier this year. Thank you for seeing the FT, Mr. President, I said. And thank you for subscribing to the FT. That's okay, he replied. You lost, I won. He was right about that. But the New York Times has published a definitive guide to Mr. Trump's falsehoods, from his position on the war in Iraq to immigration levels and the murder rate in America. There is no precedent for a US president to spend so much time on the wrong side of the truth. But let's not get too complacent here in Britain. Who can forget the pack of lies and half-truths which the Leave, oh yes, and the Remain campaign both peddled during the Brexit referendum. I could go on, but I won't. By far the most serious challenge to quality journalism, apart from what I've just been talking about, is the fragmentation of news media caused by the digital revolution. And I say challenge rather than threat, because we journalists have no choice but to embrace the revolution. And at the FT, and I'm going to say a few things about the FT, so forgive me. At the FT, there's a commercial break. At the FT, we have reshaped the newsroom from top to bottom. And it has not been easy, but we've done it. We've cut the number of newspaper editions and moved to a digital-first operation. Yet the number of journalists, still around 550, has remained the same since I took over as editor 12 years ago. 550. And the number of staff, foreign correspondents, is actually higher at more than 100. And they're the crown jewels. We've succeeded by transforming our own business model, charging for content, raising prices, and building a subscription business, which has allowed us to steadily reduce our dependence on advertising revenue. We have developed a base of digital subscribers which accounts for more than 80% of our worldwide readership of almost 900,000. So we're closing in on 900,000 paying readers. And advertising revenues now accounts for less than half of our overall business. Are there wider lessons here? Well, I don't want to get too confident, and I'm not saying that everybody can follow the FT, but here are just a few lessons that I've drawn. First, do not underestimate the power of brand. At the FT, we're proud of our 129-year heritage and our global outlook. The value of a brand also depends on a distinctive voice, especially commentators ready to go against the grain and speak truth to power. Second, we must continue to make what Marty Baron, a great editor of the Washington Post, calls the big move. The shift from print to new forms of rich journalism via data and moving image tailored to the smartphone and other platforms. Third, the most valuable resource beyond our own journalists are the readers themselves. And the FT does happen to enjoy an influential, highly educated global audience. And no, I did not use the word expert. I might have done, but I didn't. So my question to you newsmen and women in the audience is this: have we made the most of our readers, our informed readers? Because in a network world, and I hear what you say, Ray, about voice, but still, in a network world of 2.5 billion smartphones, everyone does have a voice. Everyone has the potential to be a citizen journalist. Now, there is, of course, a darker side to the digital revolution. Technology has fragmented media and helped to create a parallel universe of alternative facts. We've seen the creation of filter bubbles, self-reinforcing information channels, made all the more dangerous when that information is false or inflammatory. And we're talking about fake news. And the phenomenon of fake news is qualitatively and quantitatively different from the past. Because technology, via search engines and social media platforms, offers an unprecedented opportunity to spread fake news in real time and at scale. And the new ecosystem of digital media distribution, which you've been hearing about today, has encouraged those self-reinforcing channels, the merchants of doubt, to flourish. In the UK, almost 30% of people use Facebook as a news source, according to the Reuters Digital News Report in 2016. That figure is growing. Yet these networks are deeply flawed news outlets. And we saw that in the 2016 presidential campaign. Top performing election news stories on Facebook generated more engagement than the top stories from major news outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, NBC News, and many others. And we all know now that US intelligence agencies have unanimously found evidence that Russia, using thousands of covert human agents and robot computer programs, spread disinformation referencing the stolen campaign emails of Hillary Clinton. And these stories, supported by what we now know was targeted ad buying on social media, amplified the anti-Clinton impact exponentially. Now, I know where you think I'm going, but I'm not going there. Because let's be clear, I am not suggesting that Hillary Clinton would have won the election. Quite apart from her performance as a candidate, that's pure speculation. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm highlighting is how sensational stories are now being crafted to maximize audience and traffic. Data analytics are being deployed to identify the subjects and themes that appeal to thousands of subgroups, according to defining characteristics like religion, political beliefs, or taste in TV shows and music. Algorithms can determine these groups' hot button issues and identify followers, pinpointing those most susceptible to suggestion. And as The Economist noted in its excellent special report just the other week, social media are now a mechanism for capturing, I'm quoting, capturing, manipulating, and consuming attention like no other. And we all know as journalists that what compounds the problem that I've just described is the way audiences, and therefore ad revenues, have shifted from print to digital platforms. We know that an estimated 90% of all digital advertising goes to Google and Facebook. That's according to Digital Content Next, the media trade group. Yet, news publishers, especially in the UK, where the libel laws are a good deal more onerous, bear the considerable expense and risk relating to accuracy and fairness in the post-Leveson era. Mark Thompson, as you know, formerly boss of the BBC and now CEO of the New York Times, correctly identified the lack of a level playing field. In professional news organizations, you can see who wrote the story. And if you think it's inaccurate or biased, you know who the editor is and the publisher. With social media platforms and grand aggregators like Google and Facebook, I'm quoting Mark, the ultimate provenance of content and the algorithms that decide what we see and don't see lack this clarity. So what is to be done? First, the dominant technology sites must recognize they need to take more responsibility for the content which appears on their sites. I'm not just talking about fake news, but also hate speech and extremist propaganda. Second, they must drop the pretense that they're simply platforms and channels for publishers rather than media companies themselves. They've fast become the main source of news for significant portions of society. The reality is that they're influencing or even deciding via algorithms what information is consumed. And just remember, they have the power both to remove or publish content without assuming liability. Now, in fairness, because the FT is always fair, the leadership at Facebook and Google do appear to have recognized the gravity of this problem that I've outlined. And I'm pleased to see that Google has dropped the first click-free principle, which had been undermining paid-for content business models. Facebook and Google are now hiring dozens of humans, we used to call them editors, by the way, to train the company's search algorithms to spot low quality and false content. And both Facebook and Google are also in talks with major news publishers to support paid-for content. And that's all to the good, because to my mind, the best way for quality journalism to survive and thrive, barring generous philanthropists, is through a paid-for model. In the final resort, however, it is up to us, journalists, to produce the product that will appeal to readers and advertisers alike, that will secure our future. It's up to us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Twain, one of my favorite authors, once declared, I can't do the accent, but I'll try. If I don't read the news, I'm uninformed. If I do read the news, I'm ill-informed. After nearly 4 decades in journalism, I respectfully disagree with Mark Twain. I've spent nearly 4 decades in journalism, as I said, and I've loved every minute. Every minute. Up in Scotland, down in London, over in Brussels. The food's good in Brussels. I know it gets a bad name in this country, but it's great food. And the people are pretty good too. And across the pond in New York and Washington. And to those who say journalism is dying, I say this: it's never been more vibrant. Never. It's just different. The news cycle is no longer governed by print edition times and the whirring presses through the night. The news cycle has been crushed into bite-sized segments operating 24/7. Websites are now more like TV channels with content timed to appear, like at the FT, on a broadcast schedule, geared to specific audiences. And yes, there are legitimate questions about whether 280 characters, whether that model, that form, effectively creates attention deficits and a bias against understanding. But that's a topic for another lecture or another talk. It's the world we live in. Suck it up, as they say in America. The good news is that in a polarized world of alternative facts, there's more scope than ever for deep, original, on-the-scene reporting. That means leaving the desktop behind, getting out of the office, interviewing people, and reconnecting with our communities. And one of Newton's laws of physics, as everybody knows here in Cambridge, one of the laws of physics of Isaac Newton is that for every action, there is always an equal, an opposite reaction. That's why quality publications around the world, including here in the UK, have seen a Trump bump and a Brexit bounce in readership. So, colleagues and fellow journalists, let's agree on one thing. There's a big wide world out there which has never been more worth covering. To work. Thank you.
Lionel, thank you very much for a fascinating talk, and clearly you have some very strong and positive opinions about the future for the industry. So we have about 20-25 minutes, so if anyone has any questions, that would be fantastic. And if you could say who you are when the microphone comes to you at the back.
Hi, Lionel, over here. Matt Kelly from the New European newspaper. You spoke about Isaac Newton's dogma about equal reaction to an event. Do you feel that the right-wing media's coverage and positioning around Brexit was met with an equal reaction from the progressive left-wing media or liberal media like yourself, or was it truly outgunned? And what is the solution to outgunning a disproportionate opinion around something as important as Brexit?
Well, thanks to the European, I mean, we've got a new voice in the debate, and I don't read you every week, but I salute what you're doing, because you're trying to just present a different image of Europe and inviting other voices. I mean, I tried to talk about the way civic discourse and has been affected by successive referenda campaigns. And I think it makes it very hard if you're constantly in a battle between where it revolves around yes and no. Do I think that the pro-European or vaguely pro-European media was outgunned? I mean, actually, let's look at the politicians. They're the ones leading the argument. And do I think that the Leave campaign was better organized and had a clearer message? Yes, I do. I think it was remarkably effective. And Dominic Cummings came round to the FT and outlined it. We had to persuade him for a little while to come, because I think he thought he was going to get a 3-course lunch. You know, Leave people don't want 3-course lunches, do they? They want just simple sandwiches. So we gave him simple sandwiches, and he outlined the campaign. It was very effective. But seriously, you know, and I don't want to refight the Brexit referendum. I mean, there's been a vote. This is about, let's start with the politicians and the elected representatives.
Thank you. Paul
Connew, media commentator, and also the New European too.
Oh, I'm outgunned here.
Research by the Pew Institute in the States, and of course the Reuters Institute, shows that there's a generation emerging who have only relied on social media for their news information. What methods are open to us to really try to reclaim them and steer them back towards more trusted media? Or is there, paradoxically, the chance that they're so technically savvy that they may find for themselves that they are being hoodwinked by elements on Twitter, etc.?
Look, I'm not a behavioral psychologist. Do I think, from my own experience of using Twitter, that when you try to condense something fairly complicated into 140 characters, and even if it goes up to 280, it's pretty difficult. There's not a lot of room for nuance. And we all know, using social media, that when you take a slightly more extreme position, or you're provocative, then you get more traction and often more followers. You get a bit of abuse, but that's the problem. That's what's so clever about some of these social media. I think that we have to hope and assume, well, not just hope. It is our job to tell stories, there was a reference to this earlier, in a way that engages younger readers. And clearly, photography, pictures, images, data, graphics are 10 times, 100 times more important than they were when I started in journalism, or even 10 years ago. So that's got to be part of the package. My second point is that I have to believe that people, in the end, I mean, how satisfying? Is it just looking at little snapshots of 140 characters? Is that really the way you think you're going to be informed? So I think some of the ways in which newspapers, particularly in America, but also in the UK, have used branding, new slogans to say, listen, if you want to be informed, come to us. That's got to be the way forward. So it's a problem, but I'm not completely pessimistic about it.
Thank you. Doug.
May I ask, Doug Will is Managing Editor of the Evening Standard Independent. May I ask you a question I asked some panel members earlier, and following on exactly what you've just said. If we, that's all of us here, should follow your example, find your brand, shout about your brand, and hone your brand, if we do all that, we need to do it as an industry, because I believe we all have a common problem. How do you suggest we do that as an industry? Where have we gone wrong?
Well, first of all, and you know that the British newspaper industry as well as I do, I mean, it's fiercely independent and it's fiercely competitive. In a funny way, and I say this carefully, it's more competitive than the old US newspaper industry, which often had kind of 2 newspapers in town and then one would die. And then they were sitting on returns of 20 to 25% profit margin. Can you believe that? And then they got hammered when the classified went, and you know the story. So I think that with a very competitive British newspaper market, it's been harder to get people together. There has been an initiative by John Alcan, the Exor private equity boss Fiat, who owns newspapers, including La Stampa in Italy, who's invited other publishers to come and talk about the future of newspapers. And there was a conference in Turin earlier this year, which was actually very good. Now, in Britain, we do have we have a kind of regulatory body, but I don't think that's the right one. I mean, and some people are not joined, and we didn't. I don't think that should be the right one. I think maybe this could be a great forum here, but you need everybody, you need the players here. And I think then it's about learning from each other. It's not a concerted, effort by editors to buy themselves begging bowls and go round. That's not a good idea. I don't think we need to do that. I think what the Standard did was brave, imaginative, and actually successful, which was actually to go free, right? And you don't have the same competition. You got Metro, but I mean, you still got, and you're building a brand now. It's basically the character assassination brand. No, just joking.
May I ask a follow-up question then, please? How worried are you about Section 40 being introduced?
I'm a little bit worried because I thought, this is like some vampire that you kind of like that, and it just keeps coming back. You know? I mean, I honestly think the idea that you could be in a situation where you could be responsible for costs in a libel action, that's what you're referring to, right? You know, somebody sues you, you're right, you actually succeed in, against the odds, by the way, because it's so expensive to get involved in a libel action. And legal costs are so expensive, even before you go to court. But the idea then you go to court and you win, and then you still have to pay the costs. I mean, it's just basic equity. It's just not fair. So I can't, the idea that this is being used as a bludgeon, as a cudgel to get us all into line, to sign up to another regulator, and we know what the composition of that body is. I mean, it's not fair. It's not right. And I can't think it would stand. So, but that is where we do need to be very clear with the elected representatives.
So the society...
I'm speaking, by the way, just so you're clear, and I appreciate you put me on the spot here. I just want to make it clear. I'm speaking as the editor of the FT. I'm not speaking for all the commercial side and everything else. I think they'll probably share my view, but I've not discussed it with them.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
The society has a lot of local news organisations as members, Lionel. Would you, they might not be in a position to be able to afford a barrister. What would your advice be to them when they're thinking about all these legal restrictions and challenges?
Well, you know, look, I'm not really in a position to offer that advice. I mean, I'm expensive. Sorry, just joking. No, I don't want to be giving. I can give advice on business models, everything. I mean, look, you know, in the end, my best advice is get your bloody facts right, right? Or if you're going to take on somebody, take the time. Don't rush to print. We have a very simple maxim at the FT. I don't want to be first. I want to be right. 2 sources for every story. The day I walked in there as editor, I said, I don't care, it's sort of maybe understood, whatever. 2 sources, independent sources. And then you got a serious defense, right? And some people will try it on. I don't think you don't need to hire a barrister straight away. What you do need, I'll give you one piece of advice, get the best in-house legal counsellor. Don't go to a law firm, have the legal counsellor in the office. We did that after we had an issue 13 years ago, 12 years ago, and he's outstanding. He's outstanding. That will, and then you're going to be able to make informed choices as the editor about legal risk. And by the way, that's another thing, and Ian, I'm sure you share my view on this as a practicing editor. You know, on a big decision, I never take a decision like that on my own, ever. I'll always get a second opinion, and if it's really sensitive, I'll probably have another couple of people in the room, as well as a lawyer. Because then you know it's not all on you. It depends, even if you've had 40 years of journalism experience. So you're going to make an informed judgment about legal risk.
Thank you. Next question. Gentleman in the middle.
Thanks. Will Dawkins, ex-journalist but unreformed. Lionel, what evidence is there that the public unease at fake news presents a fantastic business opportunity for trusted media brands and how to exploit it?
We've only seen the tip of the iceberg on fake news. I mean, if you think of where we were 3 or 4 months ago and what the aggregators were saying, social media was saying about their level, the level to which they've been compromised by external actors, and we are talking about Russian-based or Russian-affiliated organizations or bots, or what's it called, the Internet something agency?
Research agency.
Yeah, Internet Research Agency. I mean, we've only got the tip of the iceberg, because now we're hearing so much more about the level of targeted ad buying, the amount of information that was seen and shared, and therefore I do think that this is a way of playing judo. You know, you can say that the social media, first of all, is realizing it's a big issue, and it puts news organizations, and by the way, I'm not just talking about newspapers or traditional news organizations. I'm talking about new startups, digital-based startups, who are creating their own brand at the moment. We can be on the moral high ground as long as we do our work and we do good journalism. And that, therefore, is a business opportunity. I think people are really going to be worried about, am I reading? Now, of course, some of the outrageous, you know, the stupid stories that are just a joke about, you know, the Hillary Clinton, the pizza pile, and that kind of stuff. That you can probably, you see it and you realize it's fake. But think of the story that's come out today, the picture, the photo of the woman, the Muslim lady on the bridge after the terrorist attack. And that was, I won't say where it was certainly on one homepage that I saw in the hour or so after the attack. And that looked like a callous, you know, a lady that was just behaving utterly callously towards a victim. That came from a bot. That was manipulated. So I think there's an opportunity here. I really do.
Thank you. Next question. Sorry, gentleman, blue shirt.
Sean Green, editor of the Guernsey Press. Thank you for a positive and uplifting speech. I just wondered whether you felt there was a gap opening up in the business models between the global brands such as yourself and the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Daily Mail, where there seems to be the digital future seems to be getting clearer, and smaller newspapers, regional, local newspapers, whether the same business model can be faced for somebody who's got an audience of tens of millions potentially, like such as yourself, and an audience of tens of thousands, such as ourselves. Now,
you see, I would never try to tell you how to do your job. But if I was the editor of the Guernsey Press, and I get the Paradise papers, I would be in paradise, because I'd be able to just, you know, there's so much in there, not actually, you know, that's nefarious, because it seems to be legal, but actually making the case and informing people about how these tax havens work. And I could go on, because that's the whole thing about online, is you haven't got 10,000, a few thousand readers. You've got people all over the world, right? You could have a lot of readers in the Cayman Islands. But seriously, I honestly think that those organizations that have discovered that, and, you know, Mail Online, they're not a British, they're global. But they've done that because of online. So I think, you know, obviously we have, you know, we haven't got a silver bullet. I just think, and certainly when I came back, having been a long time in America, I just came back and I said, you know what? We're undervaluing this brand. We've got to charge more for it. We've got to charge. If we hadn't raised prices in 2006-07, and by the way, can you imagine? Just think about it. I remember this in 2007. This is peak Britain. I mean, everybody's making out like bandits. You know, in terms of the City of London, all that. And we raised the price of the paper. I don't know, I think we stuck 50 pence on it or something. We moved off £1. And I started getting letters saying, how outrageous. And the best thing was, I said, who are these people anyway? And somebody said, well, this guy turned up, and he's absolutely gone crazy somewhere on the M1. I said, what a service station? And the guy bought the FT and he was complaining. He said, yeah, and then he drove away really mad in his red Ferrari. It's like, fuck, just, you know. I mean, the point is you need to establish pricing power. You know, and you have to do that. And it's a great signal internally as well as externally. Because internally, I could say to all the journalists, you know, it's £2.50, right, for the FT. We've got to create value here every day. So I really believe I believe passionately in, really being disciplined about what do you have versus everybody else. And we had to do that at the FT. It was by no means, everybody says the FT succeeded because it's a business publication. But Business Week was sold for, what was it, $5? It was. So it's no guarantee, but you have to really be clear about what your brand is and establish pricing power.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? You talked about the big move earlier.
Yeah.
When does the big move finish? Do you ever envisage a day when...
No, it doesn't. It definitely doesn't. Because, the day you say it's finished, you're finished. Because technology is just continuing to adapt and evolve. It's at warp speed at the moment. I mean, if you think, if you think where we were, 10 years ago, and there were certainly new forms of journalism, digital journalism was really beginning to take off. We'd sort of got through the fiction. By the way, a lot of people believe that knowledge wanted to be free, as if it's got some kind of independent mind, and that everybody had to be free because we were going to get so much digital advertising. I mean, if you went for that, you're in a dark place right now. So, I think we're now in the second or third wave. The big move, it's chapter 3.
So could you ever see the end of the printed product?
Now, everybody, well, okay, you've asked me. A lot of people say that. All the anecdotal evidence suggests that, older people like to read the printed form. And it is a different reading experience. And by the way, it is a marketing product. So if anybody, our print circulation is profitable, independent of advertising. I mean, we still make money. Just if you look at the printing costs and distribution versus price, we can make money because we've raised prices. Now, think of the marketing effect of a pink newspaper knocking around. It's pretty good. So we believe in that. And I think similarly, Standard in London, I mean, how can you make that physical presence, as strong as possible? The other point is, and you like this, I think that the print product has a great future at the weekend because people have got more time, more experience. That's why Weekend FT, it's rocking at the moment, really is.
Thank you. Catherine Rushton at the back. And then there'll be time for maybe 2 more questions after that, if that's okay, Lionel.
Tough
so
question,
everyone's got
yeah.
2 more questions afterwards.
Hi, thank you. Catherine Rushton from the Daily Mail. You've been talked about as a potential successor to James Harding as director of BBC News. Is it an appealing job?
Who's talking about it? I'm not talking about it. I love my job.
That's not the same as answering the question. Is it an appealing job?
But, I've got the best journalism job in the world. So why would I want to go to somewhere different? I really have a fantastic, can you imagine? The FT, 900,000, we're almost there. Worldwide, global, right? We're succeeding. I got great colleagues that I work with every day. I come into work with a smile. Why would I change that?
Thank you. Polly Curtis, HuffPo.
I didn't realise the Daily Mail was an employment agency, by the way. Anyway,
Oh, sorry, the lady down the front.
Hi, Polly Curtis, Editor-in-Chief at HuffPost. I loved hearing about the change you've made and going digital first and being true to the brand. Can you tell us about some of the things that you tried along the way that didn't work and what you learned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a great person for looking back. What I would say is we all make mistakes. I mean, that's why I tried to say with some humility, and if I've sounded a bit confident, I don't mean to be, because, it is not easy. I mean, one year we changed nearly 300 jobs in the newsroom at the FT. And, journalists are conservative. That's a tough, we've inverted the whole, I was listening earlier to a panel where the editor said that he'd recognised that the balance between production, if you like, and process and reporting was out of kilter. It was 2 to 1, and how you needed to invert that. Dead right, dead right. I mean, we've done that. We've got, because we've reduced editions, we've streamlined processing, the production of the newspaper, we've just freed up a whole load of resources for digital journalism, where people are creating value as opposed to just editing print editions through the night. Now, what do I do? What have we done that hasn't worked? I mean, you can look at without going into detail, what I would say is, and you can read stuff. First of all, when you launch a product and it kind of fails, then you always have some benefit, something good comes out of that. And I think if there's anything I would say is, probably we should have tried that a bit more, to just experiment a bit more. We did not do what some news organizations did, which was, really, I wasn't going to say do a Mao, but, really just turn everything upside down, get rid of a load of people. I mean, we don't do it like that. It's an evolution. It's an evolution. But we could have done more experiments. And then, of course, you have to be ruthless in saying, okay, it doesn't work, we're going to just move on. I think another, what would I say? It's about speed as well, how quickly you're going to do things. And this is a really delicate balance between bringing people along but still being decisive enough to get the change. And I think sometimes we could have moved a bit faster, but not much faster. Because, as I said earlier to the Daily Mail correspondent, it's a happy place at the FT. It's a nice place to work. We enjoy it. I enjoy it.
On that happy note,
Thank
it is
you.
1 minute to 6. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause, please, for Lionel.